bite on that, evaluating the expenditure of 250 million on the building as against where the BoG was in 2021 and what was projected as far as the economy was concerned. Prudent decision? Or they couldn't have focused
I
it?
don't think so, because we were in the midst of a crisis back then. And during that time, in my view, it would have made sense to at least pause that decision. And then subsequently, when things improve, you go back and then you look at the numbers. But the big point is there are two issues we need to discuss. The deficit financing, or the root cause of the crisis that we're talking about, that leads to the almost $60 billion sort of haircut that the central bank is taking. And then there's another issue which is to do with the bank's own internal sort of operations in that context. And I think that the bigger issue for me is the deficit financing. And there are things that we need to unpack. Because in my view, the Bank of Ghana is behaving like Pontius Pilate in the Bible by basically washing their hands and telling us that, all of this mess and all of this haircut is fundamentally down to the finance minister and the Ministry of Finance. And so they cannot be blamed for the crisis and the challenges that the economy has gone through. And that's where I think substantively we should be debating and try to unpack whether indeed that is the case, or whether the bank actually has some questions to answer when it comes to their management of the economy after the act. Because we cannot discuss Bank of Ghana outside of the context of the act and the mandate that they have. So, the Bank of Ghana Act, this one too, as amended. And they've got two key things. The first thing is to address inflation, right? So price stability, section 3.1 of the act. And then 3.2 talks about supporting government in terms of like overdraft and things like that. But the core mandate is always to do with monetary policy, fidelity, and trying to use monetary policy as a tool to address price stability or keep inflation in check in the country. And on that score, if you look at the evidence and all of that, even against the bank's own mandate, it's very clear in my books that they are failed on that mandate. And part of it has to do with the deficit financing aspect of things. So for me, if you look at all of this, and I'm sure it'll come around, I'm a bit concerned that we are focusing on the bank's operations with this 250 million dollar building or new building. Yes, it's an issue, but the bigger issue for me really is, the issue of the deficit financing,
Talking about the
where
deficit financing, and let's stay there. Let's stay at the core issue here. What do you then make of the Bank of Ghana's own explanation that it is really down to the domestic debt exchange, where they took a 53 billion CD hit? The IMF subsequently also says, yes, largely that was the reason why this has happened. Do you agree that that really is at the heart of the loss that we've seen?
But then if you go back to examine what the issues are, why would the central bank be in a position where it's basically become the piggy bank of the treasury, to the point
Okay,
that
Dr. Theo
even the
Acheampong,
treasury fund numbers.
sorry, Doc, we having a challenge with the audio. Let's see if we can fix that so we
Okay.
can hear you clearly. We'll try again. Public debt sustainability. What do you say to that?
Yes, I hope you can hear me now.
Clearly,
Hopefully
yes.
it's clear.
Clearly.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I appreciate where the Bank of Ghana, sorry, the IMF is coming from in terms of supporting the broad macro sustainability agenda. I mean, the context is important. The context is that by the middle part of last year, we're getting to the point where Ghana was struggling to close its financing gap. And a lot of the investors have started pulling out, and we saw the run on the CD and all those related things. So, in a sense, your central bank became like the measure of last resort, right? But my concern and the concern other people have raised really is that even at the time that this crisis was coming, so it is not like we didn't foresee it. We were on your platforms and other ones, and many people highlighted that we were heading into a ditch, so to say. And if you look at even the Bank of Ghana's own statement, they criticized the government by saying, let me quickly find that.
Yes,
They say
by
that
saying that the budget of 2022 was expansionary.
it expands by about 23%, and it failed to address fiscal concerns. That's really the key point, right, in there. So even the bank and others foresaw this coming. To the point then that from the middle part of last year, they now are pretty much incapacitated and they are forced to overlend to the government beyond what the government itself said it would need. In July, when the media budget was read, they said that they only needed 38 billion to close the gap. But at the end of the year, the gap now jumped to almost 60 something plus, billion. So the question is, why does the bank sit down and allow itself to be used to finance a gap that is even twice more than the government itself had indicated to us in the media budget? And it comes down fundamentally, for me, again, from where I sit, that the operational independence of the central bank is suspect. It has become pretty much subservient to the broader fiscal policy agenda of the state. And you can look at who appoints the governors and the board of the central bank. Go to section, I think, 8, right, of Act 612. It was amended. And if you read that section, the board of the bank is the board of the directors. And this consists of number one, the governor of the bank, who is the chair. Number two, the first and the deputy governors, one rep for the Ministry of Finance, D, 9 other directors, including a chartered accountant, all of whom are appointed by the president in accordance with Article 70 of the Constitution. Part of the problem is with the way these appointments are made. And so when you look at the solutions, even in what the IMF is proposing going forward, they've got to amend the Bank of Ghana Act 1. But I'm sure one of the things in there will be who gets appointed onto the board. What criteria is used for appointment such that you give them the operational autonomy and the independence to actually address the fiscal policy, the monetary policy decisions. The first thing being fighting inflation, which I said earlier that they have failed on that score when it comes to inflation. And part of the reason why they have failed is because they pumped a lot of money and a lot of overdraft to the government. So in a sense, it ended up defeating the purpose and the mandate of the central bank. The second thing is also in relation to defining very clearly what constitutes as an emergency, for which then the central bank can provide certain overdraft or loans or whatever to the government. If you look at the current act, there's a weakness in there. And the weakness in there, in my view, is what has been exploited by the Treasury and forced almost the central bank to lend quite beyond what was even originally budgeted for in the mid-year budget. So you read section 3, so I think section 30 onwards of the Bank of Ghana Act, and there are questions in there that clearly defines or talks about the fact that you've got in any year, you can lend only about 5% of the previous year's revenues to the government. And further down in section 30, it talks about that if you want to exceed this, both the government, the minister, the controller, and accountant general, all of them have got to sit down and agree on what the amount would be. And number two, it's got to be reported to Parliament. And I asked this last week on the show. Show us, or let the people in government show us what steps they took, if any, to indicate to Parliament that one, the deficit limit or the financial limit from the government, one, had been reached, but number two, this have been communicated to the relevant committees in Parliament. I have not gotten any answers, in relation to that. So you can see that here, the domestic debt exchange, all of that, that's the immediate sort of cost. But if you really unpack it, there are some forces and some issues there where the government takes a big or a huge chunk of the role, but the Bank of Ghana cannot run away and behave like Pontius Pilate and wash its hands and say, oh, we didn't, do, it was beyond our scope. Because they could have, in my view, if the board of the central bank were much more independent and much more autonomous, they could have put a stop to some of the excess financing that we've seen.
And
So
that's a very